Simone Daniels sat in the front row of her Harvard lecture, hand raised, heart pounding, but the professor called on every student except her. Minutes later, he unveiled the exact theory she submitted last week and claimed it as his own. No one said a word, no one looked her way, but what they didn't know was Simone had recorded everything. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Simone Daniels didn't dress to be noticed. Her clothes were quiet, neutral, and carefully selected to avoid standing out. She'd been warned, subtly and sometimes cruelly, that black girls who drew attention in white institutions were either too much or too angry. So she kept it simple, her curls pinned in a tight bun, navy blazer a size too big, and her notebook clutched like a shield. Harvard's weather was colder than she expected, but not nearly as icy as the reception inside the lecture hall. She arrived 15 minutes early for her first computer science seminar, heart pounding like a metronome wound too tight. The seats were already half filled, but no one looked up. Conversations buzzed in the air. Laughter, inside jokes, caffeine-fueled theories about machine learning and optimization models. Simone scanned the room, searching for even one pair of eyes that met hers. Nothing. She sat near the front, not in the first row, too eager, but not in the back either, too disengaged. She positioned herself perfectly in the academic gray zone, hoping her presence would naturally invite at least one professor's curiosity. The TA walked in, flustered and muttering to himself, flipping through slides. Then came Dr. Felix Langston, a name Simone had memorized since her acceptance letter. He was brilliant, arrogant, and notoriously dismissive. A man who had shaped much of Harvard's artificial intelligence department.
He didn't glance her way once.
"Welcome everyone," he said as the door clicked shut behind him. "Let's dive in." And just like that, Simone Daniels became invisible. Throughout the lecture, students threw around terms like neural net regularization and backpropagation instability, like they were reciting grocery lists. When the TA asked a question about adversarial models, 5 hands shot up, all white, all confident. Simone knew the answer. She had done the reading twice, but her hand stayed down, a reflex born from years of being spoken over. After class, students clustered around Langston to introduce themselves. One girl, in sleek boots and a designer tote, gushed about her internship at a robotics startup in Palo Alto. A tall guy with a Princeton hoodie flexed his recent published paper, like a badge. Simone stood a few steps back, unsure if she should approach or just disappear. She waited. Langston's eyes moved past her, then through her, like she was a smudge on the window of his day. The group broke apart. The hallway began to empty, and no one had spoken a single word to her. She finally turned and walked out. Simone had been warned Harvard was competitive. What no one told her was how loneliness could take shape in such quiet, polished cruelty. It wasn't just being ignored. It was the calculated ease with which they forgot she was even there. She passed study groups forming on benches, Slack channels being exchanged, plans to meet for coding sprints. None of it included her. It felt less like being excluded and more like she never existed at all. Over the next few weeks, it only got worse. Professors praised students, who echoed their own views. One white student offered the same AI framework Simone had submitted weeks before, and was called visionary. She received a B- and a vague note too niche. During office hours, she was told to rethink her approach, or focus less on fairness metrics, and more on technical performance. When she once mentioned racial bias and algorithmic policing, a visiting scholar chuckled and said, "Let's not bring politics into math." But Simone didn't complain. She took notes. Literally. Each incident, every ignored hand, every missing email thread, every comment that subtly diminished her, went into a hidden file on her laptop. Not out of revenge, out of survival. If she was going to be invisible, she'd be the kind they never saw coming. In the library, she found sanctuary. She'd sit near the window on the 3rd floor, surrounded by stacks of books and pages of code, often the last to leave before the building closed. Her research focus had quietly shifted. She began looking at algorithmic bias, especially how race gets distorted through predictive systems, facial recognition, loan approvals, academic placement, systems that appeared neutral, but were built on data that excluded people like her. She started building something, a model. Quietly, in the margin. She didn't tell anyone, not even the one TA who had finally learned her name. Simone wasn't just studying AI anymore. She was slowly decoding the entire framework of her erasure. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was mid-November. Simone had stayed up for 48 hours straight, debugging a model that flagged racial bias across input layers. When she finally cracked it, one line of code that corrected for demographic skew, she sat in stunned silence. The numbers didn't just work, they exposed. Her hands trembled as she saved the script. But she didn't rush to publish it. She didn't email a professor. She didn't even celebrate. Instead, the next day, she printed the results and wrote her code solution on the whiteboard in Langston's classroom. During an empty lunch hour when no one was around, she left without saying a word. The next morning, that same whiteboard sparked chaos. Professors whispered. Grad students hovered. Something she had written, in silence, in anonymity, had unraveled a major computational flaw the department had been stuck on for years. No one knew who had done it, but that very silence, Simone had been buried under. It had just become her most dangerous weapon, because what happened next would force Harvard's most elite minds to ask one impossible question. Who is Simone Daniels? No one said her name, not once. Even as Simone Daniels' solution on the whiteboard sparked a rush of murmurs and energy throughout the building, not a single person considered she might be behind it. The brilliance of her correction wasn't questioned, only its origin. Some assumed it had been a visiting researcher. Others whispered that perhaps Dr. Langston himself had cracked the code late at night and was simply being modest. A few chalked it up to an accidental breakthrough by one of the top grad students, all white, all male. Simone, meanwhile, sat quietly 2 rows behind them during class. The professor now referenced the mystery code almost every lecture, lauding its elegance, dissecting its logic, never once turning to ask if anyone in the room recognized it. He didn't have to ask. In his mind, she couldn't have done it. The truth was, Simone had become a ghost, not through isolation, but through the active mechanics of erasure. It was more than just being ignored. It was how people looked through her when taking attendance, how her suggestions in group projects were met with silence until repackaged by someone else. It was how her name never appeared in shoutouts, emails, or discussions about the brightest minds in the room. And yet, they noticed her just enough to make sure she stayed in place. After her code appeared, things changed. Subtly, cruelly. She noticed her assignments began returning with odd annotations. Lacks innovation. Too speculative. Try to stick to assigned prompts. Yet the same frameworks, regurgitated by others, were praised as ambitious. Simone tried to adapt, but the bar kept moving. In her machine learning lab, she offered to help streamline a project that was lagging in accuracy. The lead student, Max, a smug second year with Silicon Valley ambitions, waved her off with a dry smile. Let's just keep things simple. Yeah, Simone nodded. She was used to that smile. But the erasure wasn't just academic. It bled into the air, into the moments between lectures when students bonded over shared ambition. Simone wasn't invited to post-lecture coffee runs. She wasn't added to group chats. The one time she forced herself into a table discussion, a guy with slicked back hair and Google stickers on his laptop subtly turned his chair away, creating a wedge of exclusion so sharp it stung like a paper cut. Tiny, invisible injuries until they bled her dry. She thought she was imagining it. Maybe she was too sensitive. Maybe she just didn't click. But then came the whispers. One afternoon, Simone was packing up her books after a frustrating data structures class. Everyone else had filed out, or so she thought. As she reached for her laptop, voices drifted in from the hallway, just outside the door. She paused, still, then leaned slightly toward the opening. "She's still here?" one male voice asked. She recognized it. Tyler, top of the class. Loved to debate for the sake of being right. "No clue. She never talks anyway," said a second voice. "Female. Jessica, maybe." Her tone was edged with amusement. Tyler chuckled. "She's like AI wallpaper, just runs in the background. Quiet black girl." Laughter. Cruel, easy laughter. Like they weren't talking about a human being. Simone's breath froze. Something in her chest tightened. Not rage, not sadness. It was something deeper. Like the air had thinned around her, leaving her weightless and invisible in the worst way possible. Jessica added, "Honestly, I thought she was someone's diversity scholarship project." And then they were gone. Footsteps trailing off down the hallway. Casual, unbothered. Simone didn't move for a full minute. She stared at the scratched surface of her desk, the tip of her pen still pressed against the notebook, bleeding ink into the paper. Diversity Scholarship Project. The phrase lodged in her ribs like glass. The worst part wasn't what they said. It was how unsurprised she was to hear it. That night she sat alone on the library's third floor. She couldn't code, couldn't read, her thoughts raced in loops. Not one professor had said her name. Not one student had asked her for insight. Not once had anyone truly looked at her as someone who belonged. It wasn't an accident, it was designed. She remembered a conversation from her high school counselor, a black woman with tired eyes and careful words. "Harvard will teach you things you didn't apply for, Simone," she had said. "It'll teach you how to disappear in a crowd of people who think they're better than you just because they learned to speak louder." Back then, Simone had smiled politely. Now her silence tasted like ashes. But something shifted in her that evening. Something cold, sharp, and quietly defiant. If they insisted she wasn't visible, then fine, she would become unforgettable. The next day, she walked into the seminar and took her usual seat. But this time, she didn't take out her notebook. She took out a flash drive. It held every piece of the project she'd been quietly building. The code, the dataset, the analysis, and a side-by-side comparison showing how the department's existing algorithm failed. Black users 73%. She wasn't going to publish it. Not yet. Instead, she printed out 2 graphs and clipped them to the whiteboard after class, unsigned. The whispers began again, but this time, they were filled with anxiety. Where did this come from? Is this accurate? Who the hell is posting these? Within a week, it happened again. Another graph, another chart, all detailing algorithmic bias, all anonymous. The conversation started to shift. Professors speculated about a whistleblower. Students grew paranoid. Even Langston seemed unsettled, his brow furrowed during lectures, his tone sharper. Simone kept her head down. But her presence, her silence, was now a storm cloud they couldn't predict. The invisibility they forced on her was no longer her prison. It was her camouflage. Then late one Friday evening, she logged into the university research portal. A new paper had been submitted for peer review by a PhD candidate in the department. It was titled, "Reducing Demographic Skew in Predictive Algorithms: A Statistical Approach." As she scanned the content, Simone felt the blood drain from her face. It was her work, her code, her graphs, her insight, rewritten, repackaged, and stripped of every fingerprint that could tie it back to her. And just as she clicked through the attached files, one PDF opened with her full name in the metadata, buried but not erased. They had stolen her work, but they hadn't covered their tracks completely. Simone didn't sleep the night she discovered her code had been stolen. She lay on her narrow dorm bed, staring at the ceiling as fragments of the PDF replayed in her mind. Her work, her models, her analysis, stripped of her context, her perspective, her name. What stung wasn't just the theft. It was how easily Max had expected to get away with it. How he assumed she wouldn't notice. How he assumed she wouldn't matter. And beneath all of that was a darker truth. He wasn't wrong about how the system saw her. At dawn, Simone got up, showered, and walked straight to the advanced data lab. Not to confront anyone. She knew better than to face a white graduate student who had the department's ear and a family name stamped on a research building. She went because she needed answers. She needed proof. Something bigger than whispered racism and quiet sidelining. Something undeniable. When she pushed open the lab door, the bluish glow of monitors lit the empty room. Rows of high-end machines hummed, data streams pulsing like neon bloodstream. She walked past tables littered with energy drink cans and forgotten textbooks. The air smelled like overheated processors and ambition. Simone slid into an unused station and logged into her student account. The system greeted her coldly. Low permissions, limited access, restricted datasets. She typed fast, navigating to the project file Max had submitted. The metadata still showed her name.
That was the first crack.
Simone clicked deeper, bypassing surface summaries and redirecting toward the raw data the department used for its prized algorithm. Harvard Adaptive Predictive Model for Behavioral Risk Assessment. A mouthful of a name, worshipped by the department, paraded in conferences, and peddled as the university's technological jewel. Today she was ready to see why. She loaded the dataset. The screen flooded with numbers, variables, color-coded indicators, and the chilling neatness of predictive analytics. She scanned, line by line, method by method. And then she saw it. A buried auxiliary variable labeled simply DN weight 3 black flag. Her pulse stuttered. She opened the documentation. There was none. The field wasn't part of any official pipeline. It was hidden, manually inserted, unlogged, unreferenced. The value assigned to the flag. A penalty. Every time the model detected certain characteristics associated statistically with black individuals, address clusters, vernacular markers in text inputs, certain demographic codes, it nudged the risk score upward. Quietly, predictably, unfailingly, as if being black was an inherent factinal liability. Simone leaned back slowly, breath unsteady, her chest tightened. "You've got to be kidding me," she whispered to no one. But the data didn't lie. Every black identifying user in the training set had been graded as higher risk academically, financially, behaviorally, even when their actual historical outcomes were identical to or better than their white counterparts. The algorithm wasn't broken. It was built this way. A shock rippled through her as she opened more files. Notes written in hurried shorthand. Model adjustments. Log entries from years past. And then a message thread between two senior research assistants. If we remove the demographic penalty, the model loses 18% predictive accuracy on the test set. We can't publish those results. Keep the weight. No one will question it. Another reply. Besides, it's not like the flagged group is going to be reading these papers. Simone's stomach dropped. The room felt too bright, the air too thin. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling. She tried to swallow, but her throat was sandpaper. So this was why her earlier fairness metrics were dismissed. Why her concerns about bias were brushed off as political. Why her B- submissions were criticized for being too focused on demographic sensitivity. The department wasn't avoiding bias. The department was protecting it. Suddenly she heard footsteps in the hallway. She snapped upright, minimizing the window. Her heart pounded. If anyone saw her digging into locked datasets, she could lose her access. Or worse, be written up for unauthorized exploration. She wasn't naive. Black students weren't given the same grace when it came to rule bending. She turned, expecting a professor or a TA. Instead, it was a custodian. An older black man pushing a mop bucket. His name tag read Lewis. He nodded at her with quiet warmth. "Early morning," he said softly. "Couldn't sleep," Simone replied. She blinked, taken aback. "Some of us." Lewis leaned against his mop, lowering his voice. "You think you're the first one who looked at that system and noticed something rotten?" Simone stiffened. "You know about the algorithm." Lewis let out a low, weary chuckle. "I don't need to look at code to know how this place works. It's all the same pattern, year after year." She wanted to ask more, but he only gave her a small nod and shuffled away, leaving behind a trail of lemon-scented water and an eerie weight of implication. How many students before her had felt the same invisibility? How many had tried to speak, only to be swallowed by the institution? Simone turned back to the screen. She needed more concrete evidence, something undeniable. She opened another folder labeled Training Logs. The system loaded slowly, spinning. As it did, a message notification popped up in the corner of the screen. An email. From Dr. Langston. Subject: "You urgent. Unauthorized data access detected." Simone's lungs froze. The email was short. Too short. "All students must refrain from accessing restricted files following a recent breach. The department is conducting an audit. Anyone found retrieving off-limits materials will face disciplinary review." Her cursor hovered helplessly over the minimized window that still contained the incriminating data. Was it coincidence? Had someone traced her login? Did they know what she'd seen? She quickly closed all windows, deleted her history, wiped the cache, and logged out. Her fingers shook violently. She grabbed her bag and headed for the exit, pulse thudding against her ribs. She made it into the hallway before she heard two voices approaching from the faculty office. She froze behind a column as the conversation drifted toward her. Langston's voice, sharp, clipped. "We can't let students find those demographic parameters. If this gets out, our entire research grant collapses." A second voice replied, low and tense. "Professor Caldwell, it's not just the grant, it's reputational risk. You know how sensitive the media is about racial bias. We'll be crucified before we can contextualize anything." Langston exhaled. "We'll tighten permissions. No undergraduates should be in that data set anyway. Especially not the ones looking for something to complain about." Caldwell scoffed. "You mean Daniels? Langston answered without hesitation. She's already been stirring trouble, whispering about unfair grading, submitting those diversity-tilted models. It's only a matter of time before she slips, and when she does, we'll have a reason to remove her from the research track. Caldwell added, then let's catch her accessing something she shouldn't. Their footsteps moved away. Simone's knees nearly buckled.
They weren't just ignoring her.
They were planning her elimination. She waited until the hallway cleared, then hurried outside. Her breath crystallized in the cold morning air. She felt lightheaded, disoriented, but electric with the truth she now carried. She needed to think, to plan, to protect her work, to protect herself. She reached for her phone, intent on backing up the evidence. But when she opened her cloud drive, she froze. Her files were gone. Everything related to her model. Every version, every export, every graph, all deleted, except one. A new folder appeared at the bottom of the directory. Stop digging, Simone. It contained a single screenshot, her face, captured through a lab camera she never knew was recording. And the timestamp on the image proved one thing chillingly clear. Someone had been watching her the entire time she uncovered the algorithm's darkest secret. Simone barely slept after seeing the surveillance image. Her own face frozen mid-thought in front of the lab computer. Her hands had been on the keyboard. Her eyes locked on the screen that revealed the racist framework buried within Harvard's flagship algorithm. The message attached to the image wasn't long, just 3 words. Stop digging, Simone. It wasn't a warning. It was a threat. Simone paced her dorm room for hours, replaying every interaction, every subtle signal that now seemed sinister in hindsight. How long had they been watching her? Since she discovered the bias, or since she posted her anonymous graphs on the whiteboard weeks earlier? Maybe even longer. She had underestimated them. Not just their racism, but their precision. She couldn't prove who had sent the image. It was uploaded through a file dropper. Untraceable. No IP trail. But she had seen the names. She had heard the voices in the hallway. Caldwell and Langston. The department wasn't just ignoring injustice. It was actively curating it. She thought about exposing them, going to student affairs, filing a formal complaint. Then she remembered what happened to the last black student who tried that. The story had circulated in whispers. A senior named Donovan Westbrook, bright, unapologetic, focused on racial equity and predictive modeling. He vanished midway through his final semester. Officially, it was a leave of absence for mental health. But no one had seen him since. His research? Scrubbed. His name? Absent from departmental records. Even his LinkedIn had gone dark. Simone didn't want to vanish. She wanted to be undeniable. That night, something in her snapped, not with rage, but with a colder clarity. She stopped trying to win their approval. She stopped hoping they'd see her. Instead, she began to prepare something they couldn't ignore. The idea hit her while walking past a lecture hall at 2 a.m., carrying a USB filled with every piece of salvaged data she had managed to recover. The halls were quiet, the floors glossy from fresh janitorial work. The whiteboards had been wiped clean, a ghostly shine beneath the overhead lights. She paused outside Langston's classroom. Her eyes drifted to the massive whiteboard that ran wall to wall, usually filled with complex math proofs and doctoral equations. It was blank now. Empty space. Pure silence. Just like the silence they had forced on her since day one. Simone walked inside slowly, the door hissing shut behind her. She dropped her bag, unzipped it, and pulled out the printed pages. Her code, her notes, the graphs, her original model. All of it. And then she picked up a dry erase marker. Line by line she wrote. It took her 2 hours. She built the logic flow, detailed the predictive bias correction, and highlighted the racial weighting error that had corrupted the department's entire model. She didn't just critique it. She offered a solution, a better one, and she signed none of it. Before leaving, she added one final line at the bottom corner. Bias doesn't break the system. Bias is the system. She erased her fingerprints from the markers, wiped the doorknob with her sleeve, and walked out, heart racing. The next morning, campus buzzed like a struck bell. Someone had found the whiteboard before the 8 a.m. class. By 8:30, a crowd of students had gathered. At 8:45, Langston arrived, and for the first time in his polished career, looked genuinely unsettled. By 9 a.m., the board was photographed, screenshotted, debated, dissected, and shared in every department Slack channel. Whispers turned into heated questions. Professors in neighboring departments poked their heads in. TAs stared wide-eyed. Some tried to identify the handwriting. No one could. At 10 a.m., Langston attempted to start class. Let's return our focus to neural pathways, he began, jaw tight. But the students weren't listening. They were whispering. Who wrote that?
Is it real?
I thought our system was neutral. Langston erased the board with forced calm. But it was too late. The image had already gone viral within the Ivy League student networks. Someone posted it to Reddit, another to Twitter. The image exploded. And Simone? She sat in her usual seat, quiet, composed, unmoving. But inside, Simone was burning. Not with pride, but with a kind of terrifying stillness. She had sparked something. Now she just had to wait to see if it ignited or destroyed her. Later that day, she entered the data lab again, pretending to study for an upcoming exam. She wasn't alone. 3 graduate students were huddled around a monitor, whispering urgently. One of them pointed at the screen. Simone caught a glimpse. It was her model, not the old one, not the plagiarized version. Max submitted. This was hers, line for line, and someone had uploaded it to the department's shared research drive, under the folder titled Unverified Theories. They were trying to bury it. Again, Simone took a breath, walked to her own station, and logged in. As soon as she did, a notification flashed across the screen. You have been invited to a private folder, discussion, author unnamed. Others called it dangerous. One comment stood out. This work is decades ahead of current racial equity modeling. We should identify the author and offer a research fellowship before a competitor school does. Simone stared at the comment. She was finally being seen, just not by name. And then, like clockwork, the twist came. She received an email from Max. Subject: need to talk. Urgent. The message read. Her first instinct was to delete the email, but something about it held her. The tone wasn't smug. It wasn't threatening. It was scared. She stared at the screen for nearly 5 minutes. Was this a trap? Or was Max finally unraveling? When night fell, she crept into the west stairwell. It smelled like dust and secrets. She found Max pacing near the 3rd landing, running his hands through his hair. When he saw her, he flinched. You came, he said. She crossed her arms. Why? Max hesitated. They're covering it up. All of it. Not just your code. Not just the bias. Everything. Simone narrowed her eyes. You're part of they. I was, he admitted. But I didn't know how deep it went. Langston, Caldwell, even the dean. This isn't about research anymore. They're protecting something a lot darker. Simone's voice was razor sharp. You stole my work. I did, and I'm sorry. But you don't understand. You think this is just racism in academia. Simone, it's bigger. She stepped back slightly. What are you talking about? Max looked over his shoulder, lowered his voice. The model was never just for research. It was funded by a third-party group, private surveillance contractors. They're testing behavioral risk profiling for government agencies. Simone felt her stomach twist. They're testing on students? She asked. Max nodded. And disproportionately flagging students of color. Especially black students. And they all know, Langston's getting paid to keep it buried. And before Simone could respond, Max pulled out a flash drive and pressed it into her hand, whispering, if they find out I gave you this, I disappear. The night Max handed Simone the flash drive, she barely made it back to her dorm before her legs gave out beneath her. She slid down the door once it shut, breathing hard, clutching the tiny device like it was a detonator. And in a way it was, because whatever was inside it had terrified Max. A student who never feared anything except losing his status. Simone didn't plug it in. Not yet. She was smart enough to know that opening a file on a university-monitored network could be a trap. Harvard didn't tolerate curious undergraduates digging where they didn't belong, as Caldwell had said. Instead, she hid the drive behind the loose panel, beneath her desk, and stared at the wall, until the sun crawled up the horizon. She didn't sleep. Her mind replayed Max's confession on a loop. Racial profiling, government contracts, the department's involvement. She knew corruption existed everywhere, but discovering it in the academic sanctuary she had once idolized felt like betrayal at a molecular level. Still, she didn't have time to process. Because the next morning, as she walked through Harvard Yard, she saw a crowd gathering near the science building. At first, she thought it was about the whiteboard incident again. Maybe another anonymous posting. Maybe another debate. She pushed through the students and froze. There, on a massive digital screen mounted on the building's facade, was a headline rotating in bold serif text. Harvard unveils groundbreaking solution to algorithm bias. She blinked. A second line appeared, a landmark step toward ethical AI. Dr. Felix Langston. Simone's stomach twisted. Then the video began playing. Langston stood behind a podium, smiling with a confidence that made Simone's skin crawl. Behind him was a projection of the exact diagrams she had written on the whiteboard, slightly cleaned up, digitally rendered, but unmistakably hers. We are proud to announce a critical breakthrough in eliminating demographic skew within our predictive models, Langston said. For years, researchers in this department have been exploring fairness metrics. But this, he gestured to her work, this marks a turning point. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. Students stared up at the screen with awe. Simone couldn't breathe. It was hers. Every formula, every annotation, every refinement, even her structure, her flow, her logic. They had copied it all down to the smallest detail. Langston's smug smile as he took credit for her discovery burned like acid. He stole it, she whispered. A girl standing next to her glanced over. Who? Simone swallowed the truth. Nobody, she murmured. Because saying something here, in public, with cameras around, would get her labeled unstable. Bitter. Delusional. The quiet black girl accusing a decorated white professor of theft. Harvard would spin it like a top. Langston would deny. Caldwell would smile, and the system would swallow her whole. Her phone buzzed. It was a mass email from the department, celebrating Dr. Langston's pioneering advancement in ethical computing. Simone closed her eyes. She felt a numbness spread through her chest. A familiar numbness, the same kind she'd felt the first time they ignored her hand in class, the first time they erased her name from an email chain, the first time she realized she could vanish and no one would notice. But this time was different. This wasn't invisibility. This was theft. She moved through the campus like she was underwater, barely hearing the congratulatory chatter floating in the air. Students praised Langston's brilliance, professors spoke excitedly about Harvard's leadership in fairness, and the department's website showcased a polished announcement. Everywhere she turned, her work lived, without her. Later that afternoon, she arrived at her machine learning lecture. Every seat buzzed with conversations about the breakthrough. Someone said, I wish I had thought of that solution. Another said, only Langston could have connected the dots. Simone sat silent in the second row, her nails digging crescents into her palms. Langston entered the room 15 minutes late, basking in his new spotlight. The students applauded, some even standing. He waved them off with fake humility. Let's settle, everyone. Please. Groundbreaking days like this come once in a generation, but work doesn't pause for applause. Simone felt sick. He launched into a lecture on fairness in AI, using her own logic structure. He traced her flowchart on the board, explaining it with arrogance and occasional condescension as if the students were too slow to grasp his innovation. But then he said something that jolted her back into focus. Your assignments for this week, he announced, will be to critique the methods I used in the new correction model, analyze its limitations, point out potential improvements. Simone's jaw tightened. Her work, her logic, her innovation. And now he wanted them to critique her. When class ended, Simone gathered her things slowly. Most students lingered to congratulate Langston personally. She planned to slip out unnoticed, as always. But then, Daniels. Her heart stuttered. She turned. Langston stood behind her, a peculiar smile tugging at his lips. I saw you weren't particularly enthusiastic today, he said. Simone kept her voice steady. I'm just processing the news. He nodded. Understandable. Breakthroughs of this magnitude can be overwhelming for some students, especially those still finding their footing here. A sting hit her spine. He continued, lowering his voice. This is a competitive institution, Simone. Not everyone gets to shape the future. He smiled faintly. Try not to get distracted by ideas outside your level. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even clever. But it was strategic. A warning cloaked as guidance. Simone forced a quiet, yes, professor, and walked away before the heat in her chest turned into something dangerous. She went straight to the library. She needed isolation. But the moment she opened her laptop, 5 new emails appeared. All congratulating Langston. All praising the department. All forwarded through faculty mailing lists she had never been included in before. A fire lit inside her. Not rage. Clarity. She opened the flash drive Max had given her. The folder contained documents, contracts, funding proposals, internal memos, emails between faculty and third-party developers, a spreadsheet labeled Behavioral Outcome Correlation Matrix, race indicators, hidden. Simone scrolled, horrified.
This wasn't just an algorithm.
It was a blueprint for institutionalized predictive racism, masked as research. Max had been right. They had built a system where Black identity increased predicted risk in everything from academic performance to financial behavior. They weren't just ignoring bias, they were monetizing it. And they had used her work, her solution, to fix the one flaw that made their model detectable. Her stomach turned. Then she opened the last file. It was an email thread, a long one. Caldwell, Langston, several board members, and another name she didn't expect. Maxwell Haywood. Mac. He hadn't just stolen her work. He had been in constant communication with them. The thread discussed suppressing whistleblowers, adjusting low-profile students' grades to discredit them, discouraging activist-leaning undergraduates, and labeling Simone as statistically expendable. She kept scrolling until her thumb froze. There, near the bottom of the chain, was a message timestamped just 48 hours earlier. It was from Caldwell. We've identified the source of the whiteboard leaks. Daniels. She's been accessing restricted datasets. Handle this before she becomes a liability. Her pulse roared in her ears. They knew. They had known. The silence wasn't ignorance. It was surveillance. One more line in the thread caught her breath. Delete anything linking her to the modified algorithm. We'll credit Langston instead. Simone stared at the screen, the words blurring. They had planned everything. Her erasure wasn't an accident. It was a strategy. Her phone buzzed suddenly. A notification from an unknown number. She opened it. A single line appeared. Check the last email in the thread. Simone scrolled to the bottom. Her eyes widened. The final email wasn't from a professor. It was from someone inside administration, admitting exactly how they framed her, and who had ordered it. The email was brief, brutal, and damning. From Vice Provost Marshall Green to Dr. Caldwell. Dr. Langston. Subject: Re-Containment Protocol for Daniels. Proceed as discussed. Daniels is not strategically aligned with Harvard's public initiatives. She poses reputational risk if left unchecked. Adjust academic standing, limit access to departmental platforms, and monitor contact with external media. If challenged, cite academic integrity concerns. No direct correspondence. Maintain plausible deniability. Simone read it 3 times before her body allowed her to breathe. The email wasn't speculative. It wasn't vague. It was a direct administrative order to erase her academically, reputationally, professionally, and it confirmed her worst fear. They were never going to let her belong. Not because she wasn't good enough, but because she was too good, too aware, too awake. That made her dangerous. The next 72 hours were a slow-motion ambush. First came the grade change. Her GPA, which had been hovering at a 3.8, was suddenly downgraded. Not by a margin, but with surgical malice. A professor she had once received an A from retroactively amended it to a C+, due to suspicious inconsistencies in her citation methodology. She never got a chance to appeal. The portal listed it as final. Next came the access blocks. Simone tried logging into the department research drive to back up the files from the flash drive. Her credentials failed. A red error box blinked across the screen. Permission revoked. Contact admin. She called it. They redirected her to the dean of academic records, who wasn't in the office. Every hallway she tried to push through had been quietly sealed behind her. Then came the whispers. More targeted this time. 2 students from her ethics class passed her in the corridor, their voices intentionally loud. I heard she plagiarized some old grad work. Yeah, she's just mad she got caught. Their eyes didn't meet hers, but the smiles did. Smug, curated, intentional. Harvard's social machine had turned on her with chilling speed. One post on a student forum accused her of faking data for political clout. Another claimed she'd been aggressively disruptive in class, although no one had ever seen her raise her voice. But the final blow came through her inbox. Subject: Review of academic standing. Immediate attention required. The message informed her that her eligibility for honors research had been suspended pending investigation. She was no longer authorized to participate in the university's Innovation Fellowship program. She could reapply next academic year contingent on departmental review and behavior during this period. Simone stared at the screen, numb. They didn't need to expel her. They were suffocating her slowly, removing oxygen from every room she tried to enter. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run into Langston's office and throw the printed email across his desk. But she knew what would happen. He'd lean back, cross his legs, offer a polite smile, and say, "Simone, I'm afraid you're imagining patterns that don't exist." Then he'd weaponize her reaction as proof of instability. So instead, Simone did what they least expected. She got quieter. She stopped responding to their provocations. She stopped attending class in person. She sat in the farthest corner of the library, headphones on, hood up, digging deeper into the flash drive Max had given her. She backed up every file onto 3 separate encrypted clouds. She downloaded metadata from the whiteboard screenshots. She compiled every timestamp, every Slack message, every version of her original model, and she built something new.
Not just code.
A digital trail of truth. And she didn't do it alone. Because while Harvard had turned against her, one figure stepped quietly out of the shadows. It was Lewis, the janitor. The same man who had once said, "Harvard does that to some of us more than others." Simone ran into him again outside the lab one night, as she was heading out and he was sweeping the halls. "You still fighting?" he asked softly, without looking up. "I'm the only one still bleeding," she replied. Lewis leaned on his broom and glanced toward the frosted glass of Langston's office. "That place has a habit of swallowing kids like you. I've seen it happen more times than I can count." Simone hesitated. "So why are you still here?" He gave her a long look, eyes sharper than she expected, because someone's gotta remember the names of the ones they try to erase. She didn't speak, but something shifted in her chest. Lewis continued, quieter now. "I was here when they pushed out Donovan. You remember that name?" Simone nodded slowly. "He tried to publish a paper on racial patterning in surveillance tech. They said he went crazy." Lewis muttered. "Said he fabricated sources. But that boy was clean. I used to see him right where you're sitting now, writing everything down. They scrubbed him like chalk off a board." He paused, then added, "Before he left, he gave me something. Said if I ever saw it happen again to someone like you, I'd know what to do." Simone's breath caught. Lewis pulled something from his coat, a battered folder, yellowing at the edges. Inside were notes, documents, a printed thesis draft, and a USB drive. She stared at it. "Donovan's?" Lewis nodded. "They never deleted everything. Just buried it." Simone took the folder with trembling hands. The 2 models, hers and Donovan's, were frighteningly similar in purpose. Expose institutional bias encoded in systems designed to look neutral. It was a pattern, a tradition. Harvard didn't just ignore dissenting black voices. It recycled their ideas, erased their names, and sold the brilliance as its own. Simone felt a slow burn of vindication, but also sorrow, for Donovan, for every student who had come before her thinking they'd change the system, not realizing the system had already planned their disappearance. She walked out of the library that night, with both drives in her pocket, hers and Donovan's. Different voices, same silence. But the silence was cracking. A week later, the university hosted an AI conference on bias and ethical design. Langston was the keynote. His face was on the posters. His name glowed from digital banners across campus. And Simone? She sat in the back row, hood up, anonymous but no longer afraid. Midway through Langston's speech, a notification pinged every faculty inbox. Then the student body. Then the media. It was a leak, one Simone had scheduled using an encrypted drop. The full email thread from Vice Provost Green. The academic grade tampering order. The original whiteboard photos. The metadata proving she had authored the core model. Donovan's thesis. And a voice memo from Langston himself. One Max had secretly recorded and forgotten to delete, where he laughed and said, "The Daniels girl? No one's going to believe her. She's just noise." The auditorium went still. Langston's voice echoed from the speakers, now overpowered by the recording. Simone stood quietly in the back, heart thudding.
Phones buzzed.
Whispers spread. Faculty members exchanged wide-eyed looks. Someone near the stage turned toward Langston and said, "Is this real?" He didn't answer. And just before the lights in the auditorium flickered, a second message hit every inbox. This one from the Office of Institutional Equity, requesting an urgent meeting with Simone Daniels. The emails detonated like firecrackers inside the Cathedral of Harvard. It began with one ping, just one, as the first student opened their inbox mid-lecture and froze, then another, and soon, like a digital virus, the entire campus was infected. Screens lit up in dining halls, libraries, dorms, lecture hall, words that were never meant to be seen outside the high walls of faculty, inboxes spilled into public view, words that cut like blades. Simone Daniels has become a distraction. Her concerns are emotion, not data. The Daniels girl thinks she's smarter than the system. Let her try. We'll drown her in procedure until she gives up, or combusts. She's too quiet to matter. And one, uglier than the rest, a line buried deep in an internal chat between Langston and another senior professor. She's not here for brilliance. She's here for optics. Those 12 words, stripped of all academic veneer, exploded across every social platform. Within hours, the hashtag #OnQuietBlackGirl trended nationally. A post of Simone sitting alone in the back row of Langston's class, unknowingly photographed weeks earlier, was now retweeted over 70,000 times with the caption, "This is what genius looks like when the world refuses to look back." The emails weren't just proof of bias. They were proof of intent. The calculated silencing, the academic gaslighting, the digital erasure. It was all there, typed out casually, as if mocking her was just another routine part of the day. And the world saw it all. Harvard's response came fast, but not clean. By midday, the university released a bland, half-hearted statement. "We are aware of recent unauthorized disclosures and are conducting an internal review to address concerns."
No apology.
No mention of Simone by name.
No ownership.
Instead, they called it a leak, not an exposure. A breach, not an awakening. But students weren't buying it. Neither were alumni, donors, or media outlets. Simone sat alone in the dining hall that afternoon, her tray untouched, as she watched footage of CNN anchors debating the emails on a wall-mounted screen. One panelist said, "This isn't just about Harvard. This is every elite institution in America." Another added, "The silence toward black students isn't passive. It's engineered." She didn't cry. Not yet. She was too far past anger for that. But she couldn't ignore the title shift. That morning, she had walked across campus as a pariah, the ungrateful scholarship student who made trouble. By sunset, she had become the face of a national reckoning. Still, Simone knew better than to confuse attention with justice, because Harvard, in true Harvard fashion, had already begun rewriting the narrative. An anonymous source close to the administration leaked a memo to the Boston Herald, claiming Simone had accessed confidential research data without authorization, implying the leak may have been motivated by academic retaliation. The framing was subtle, professional, but it was a smear. The university had moved from erasure to deflection. Simone wasn't surprised. They couldn't deny the emails. They were real, time-stamped, undeniable. But they could try to recenter the story around protocol breaches and disciplinary concerns. Within 24 hours, her academic record was quietly flagged for pending inquiry. A reporter called her room, asking if she had hacked the faculty system. Another email landed in her inbox, this time from the Office of Student Conduct, requesting a meeting about recent behavior affecting university security. They weren't backing down. They were escalating. And yet she wasn't alone anymore. By the second day, students had organized a sit-in at the Science Building. Nearly 100 packed the hallway outside Langston's office. Holding signs, she spoke code. They spoke silence. "Brilliance is not a threat. Say her name. Simone Daniels." A small group wore printed shirts with lines from the leaked emails on the back, weaponizing the professor's own words against them. Still, Simone hadn't spoken publicly. Not to the media. Not to her classmates. Not even to the Office of Institutional Equity, who had requested the meeting after the leak. Until now. She entered the equity office on the third day with no lawyer, no advisor, just a folder in her hand and a flash drive in her pocket. The woman who greeted her, Dr. Renee Warren, was composed but uneasy. She was black, mid-40s, sharp suit, the kind of woman who had probably climbed every ladder while dodging every invisible blade Simone had just endured. "Simone," Dr. Warren said gently. "Please sit." Simone did. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Dr. Warren leaned in. "You don't need to prove what they did," she said. "The world has already seen it. But what comes next? That's about power." Simone's throat tightened. "They're going to try to reduce you to a headline," Dr. Warren continued. A news cycle. A policy update. But you're not that. And if you're ready, we can make this bigger than an investigation. Simone placed the folder on the desk. These are the files, she said. The ones Max gave me. And the ones I saved before they wiped my access.
Dr. Warren opened it slowly.
Her eyes widened as she scanned the contents. Simone added quietly, I don't want a scholarship extension or a grade appeal. I want a hearing. Public. Transparent. On record. Dr. Warren looked up. You want to put Harvard on trial? Simone nodded once. No more shadows. That evening, a formal complaint was filed with the university board, with dozens of students, faculty, and media copied in for transparency. Simone's case was now officially active. The investigation couldn't be buried. Not this time. But Harvard wasn't done fighting dirty. That night, a leak from unconfirmed sources claimed Simone had falsified her initial model. A spreadsheet was anonymously published online, an altered version of her work, showing statistical flaws. The goal was clear: discredit her expertise. Simone stared at the document, then at the metadata. It had been edited using Langston's department login. And yet the university refused to confirm or deny its origin. The smear campaign had begun. But Simone had learned by now. Her silence had power, but her presence had even more. The next morning she stepped into Langston's lecture hall one last time. The room was packed. News cameras had been barred, but students live-streamed from their phones anyway. Langston stood at the front, visibly tired, but still trying to control the room. He opened with a forced laugh. Seems we've had quite a week. No one laughed. Simone didn't speak. Not until she walked to the front of the room, past her peers, past Langston, and picked up the dry erase marker. Just like the first time. She turned to the board, and in clear, precise strokes, she wrote, You didn't discover me. You just couldn't delete me fast enough. The room erupted. Phones recorded. Students stood. Langston didn't move. Because in that moment, Harvard wasn't watching Simone anymore. It was watching itself. And just as Simone stepped down from the board, her phone buzzed with a new message. This time not from Harvard, but from a journalist at the New York Times. Simone, we found 3 more students like you.
Same story.
Different schools. Are you ready to go national? The message from the New York Times had barely finished vibrating across Simone's screen when the next blow came. Sudden, calculated, and devastating. Her student portal locked her out. At first she assumed it was routine maintenance. But when she tried again, a red banner flashed across the page. Access suspended pending academic review. Her throat tightened. She tried again. Same message. Then a second notification appeared at the top of her screen. Academic status. At risk, immediate advisor consultation required. A cold wave rolled through her body. She clicked the details link, hands trembling. Her grades had changed. Again. The A- in computational ethics had been downgraded to a D. Her machine learning midterm, which she remembered scoring high on, was now listed as 0, academic integrity violation. Another class she'd never struggled in showed a mysterious incomplete she had never been notified about. They weren't subtle anymore. They were dismantling her future in real time. Simone sat frozen in the middle of the science building hallway, as students walked around her, unaware of the earthquake cracking beneath her feet. She whispered to herself, slow and disbelieving. They're really doing it. They're actually doing it. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from the registrar's office. Your graduation eligibility is temporarily suspended pending investigation. Failure to comply may lead to academic dismissal. Dismissal. They were aiming to erase her completely. Not just from the department, not just from research, but from Harvard itself. The next hours blurred into a haze of panic and humiliation. She called the registrar. They redirected her to the dean of students. The dean redirected her to academic integrity services. They stated they couldn't share details of an ongoing investigation. It was like falling into a bureaucratic quicksand designed specifically to suffocate her. By afternoon, the entire campus buzzed with rumors. She cheated on an exam. She hacked the system. She leaked the emails to cover her tracks. I heard she fabricated her research. Every whisper felt like a small cut. Not fatal alone, deadly together. Simone walked across Harvard Yard, head down, ears ringing. A group of students paused their conversation as she passed. One muttered, "That's her." Another added, "I mean, if she really was some genius, why would she cheat?" Their doubt hurt more than their words. because it echoed the quiet narrative Harvard had built around her since day one. She doesn't belong. She made it back to her dorm room, shut the door, and sank to the floor. Her hands shook uncontrollably. She had gone up against Harvard, and Harvard was fighting back with its full weight. An entire machine built to protect elites, silence dissenters, and rewrite truth. Her chest tightened painfully. Her breath broke, short and uneven. For a brief, terrifying moment, she thought she might faint. She pressed her palms to the cold floor and tried to anchor herself. "Breathe," she whispered. "Breathe, Simone. You can't fall apart now." 3 deep breaths.
Then 4.
Finally, her body began to obey. But when she looked at her reflection in the mirror, eyes red, face pale, shoulders slumped, she barely recognized herself. She wasn't the quiet girl anymore. She wasn't invisible. She was hunted. A soft knock jolted her. She stiffened. "Who is it?" "It's me." The voice was low, hesitant. "Louis." She opened the door. He didn't come in, just stood there, gripping his custodial cart like a shield.
You okay?
He asked. Simone shook her head. "No." Louis nodded, as if he expected that answer. "They're cornered. When institutions feel cornered, they bite hard." "I'm going to fail," Simone whispered. "They're going to make me." Louis studied her face for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Even when they erase your record, they can't erase your truth. But the truth doesn't matter if I'm expelled." She shot back. Louis leaned closer. "Then you don't fight them alone anymore. Someone's been watching your back." She frowned. "Who?" But he only shook his head. "You'll know soon." Before she could question him further, he turned and walked away. That night, Simone tried to piece together a plan. She opened Donovan's files again, comparing them with her own. She wrote timelines, drafted statements, organized evidence, but everything felt fragile. The institution had more power, more lawyers, more influence, more reach. She was just one student. At 1:12 a.m., she finally closed her laptop and sat in the dark.
Maybe she should quit.
The thought came like a whisper, quiet, poisonous. Maybe she should walk away before they took everything. Before they humiliated her publicly. Before Harvard destroyed her credibility for the rest of her life. But then another thought rose, louder. This is exactly what they want. She opened her eyes.
No.
She wasn't done. She wasn't broken. They had pushed her to the brink. But she hadn't fallen. A sudden vibration broke the silence. Her inbox pinged. She assumed it was another university notice, or another automated warning, or maybe a campus alert that someone had posted a new rumor about her. But the subject line froze her breath. "For you, before they destroy you entirely." The sender was anonymous. No name. No identifiable address. Just a single attachment. A zipped folder titled Truth Archive. Simone didn't move. Her heart pounded as she hovered the cursor over the file. Was it a trap? A virus? A setup? But the timing was too precise. Too specific. Too targeted. She clicked. The folder opened. Inside were dozens of documents. Screenshots, emails, Slack logs, audio files, none of which she had ever seen before. Messages from Caldwell mocking her as the quiet black girl with delusions of relevance. Notes from Langston debating how to undercut her without provoking backlash. Attachments detailing grade manipulation. Meetings about containing her influence. Even correspondence between administrative staff planning to adjust her academic status before any external inquiry. One file contained voice memos of faculty discussing her emotional instability as justification for future disciplinary action. Another included a spreadsheet titled Risk Students, Internal Flagging. Her name was highlighted in red. And then she found it. A signed memo from Vice Provost Green. Ensure Daniels' record reflects consistent academic struggle. If necessary, fabricate inconsistencies to support disciplinary action. Simone sat frozen. It was the missing link. The smoking gun. The undeniable proof that everything they had done to her, every grade change, every access block, every rumor, had been intentional. A conspiracy wrapped in academic authority. She scrolled to the bottom of the folder. One last file waited there. A note. Plain text. No formatting. "You're not alone. And you're not crazy." Her eyes stung. But she wasn't crying from pain. She was crying from recognition. From the sudden overwhelming clarity that she wasn't fighting shadows. She wasn't imagining corruption. She wasn't losing her grip. She was being targeted. And now she had evidence. Powerful evidence. Evidence that could burn the institution down. Her hands trembled as she whispered into the dark. They can't bury me anymore. She stared at the folder, at the truth she had been denied, mocked for, punished for.
This was her lifeline.
This was her weapon. And as she prepared to forward the files to the Times journalist, another email popped up, this time from a real name she recognized instantly. A name she never expected to see on her side, Maxwell Haywood. The subject line read, "Simone, they know about the leak. They're coming for you tonight." Simone didn't breathe as she read the subject line again. "Simone, they know about the leak. They're coming for you tonight." The name under it was real. Maxwell Haywood, the same Max who had betrayed her, then tried to redeem himself with the flash drive. The same Max who had vanished after the first wave of backlash, who hadn't spoken since the day he handed her the smoking gun in a stairwell. But this wasn't guilt. This was panic. She clicked the message. They accessed the local server logs. Someone noticed the metadata from the files. They're saying it was you. Langston wants to frame it as an internal cyber breach and tie you to the leak. He's called a private meeting with campus security and the Office of Legal Affairs. I tried to stall it, but they're not playing anymore. Get out of your dorm, now. Simone's stomach twisted. Her mind raced. She had just been reading the archive, everything they never wanted the world to know, and now they were moving to erase her again. Only faster. This time, it wasn't about grades or rumors. It was about institutional cover-up. About law. She yanked the flash drive from her laptop and stuffed it into her jacket, along with Donovan's. Her phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. One word. Run. She didn't ask questions. She threw on her hoodie, shoved her laptop into her bag, and slipped out into the hallway. Every door looked sharper now. Every corner felt watched. She didn't know if they'd send security, tech investigators, or someone worse. The university knew they had been exposed. Now they wanted to contain the explosion. Simone moved through the shadows of campus, her breath fogging in the cold night air, her footsteps silent over the cobblestone. She didn't go back to Lewis. Not yet. She didn't head to the Office of Institutional Equity. They were probably being watched, and she didn't trust any administrator not to fold under pressure. Instead, she followed the last lead Donovan had left behind, something she had nearly ignored. A folder buried deep in his original thesis files, titled Unseen. Inside were notes, not code, not data, but names, dates, and meeting location. They were lists, handwritten, of students from past years, all students of color, mostly black, all described in brief notes, spoke out in class, challenged grading bias, questioned algorithm structure, filed ethics complaint, and next to each name, a coded outcome. Discredited, withdrawn, transferred quietly, expelled, unofficial, mental health leave, unresolved. Dozens of names, none of them still on campus, many of them scrubbed from the university website entirely. Donovan had seen the pattern before anyone else, and he had tracked it. Simone walked until she reached an old building near the edge of campus, Dunbridge Hall, mostly used for storage and graduate overflow housing. It wasn't empty, but it always felt forgotten, tucked behind the main library, with no active classrooms, and poor security. It was one of the locations Donovan had circled. She took the risk. Inside, the halls were dim, the lights buzzing faintly overhead. She found room 213, as marked in his notes, and knocked once, then twice. Nothing. She tried the door. It creaked open. Inside was a small room, lit only by a desk lamp, and surrounded by bookshelves. On the floor were folding chairs. A corkboard was pinned with printed emails, redacted notes, and old student newspaper clippings. And in the center, a laptop, still open. Simone stepped inside slowly, unsure what to expect. Then a voice from behind startled her. "You're not Donovan." She turned sharply. A woman stood there, late 20s, tired eyes, face sharp with intelligence. "I'm not," Simone said quietly. "But I have his files." The woman stared at her, then shut the door. "How did you find this place?" Donovan left a trail. His thesis. His archive. "You're one of them, aren't you?" The woman nodded. "My name's Imani, class of 2018. I was in the data policy cohort. I tried to publish a paper on how our predictive models penalized first-gen students using biased financial assumptions. They said I had misread the dataset, that I was combative. I was forced out of the research program. My final paper was deleted. Simone's chest ached. I believe you. Imani tilted her head. You're the one they're talking about now, aren't you? The quiet black girl? Simone exhaled. Not so quiet anymore. Imani gave a half smile. Donovan said if he didn't make it, someone would. Maybe it's you. Then from behind a curtain partition, others began to step out, one by one. 3 students. 2 alums. 1 young black man with a cane and tired eyes. A South Asian woman who wore silence like armor. A Latina student with cropped hair and a hard stare. They were all here. The ones who had vanished. Not literally, but institutionally. Blacklisted. Isolated. Removed from the conversation. Not the... I thought I was alone. Simone whispered. We all did, said the man with the cane. That's how they win. One of the former students handed Simone a folder. These are archives we've kept. Scraps. Files. Old meeting notes. Rejections. Letters from the administration. Most of it was shredded years ago. But some survived. Like this. He flipped open a document. At the top, the Harvard seal. At the bottom, a line that turned Simone's spine cold. Internal Protocol for Managing Disruptive Diversity Candidates. It wasn't a title they'd ever publish, but it was real. And inside were guidelines. How to discourage whistleblowers. How to manage media optics. How to steer conversations away from racial inequity and back toward meritocracy. One page was labeled, Risk Matrix Identity-Based Threat Level. Black women in STEM were listed as high risk because they disrupt traditional data narratives. Simone felt her knees weaken. This isn't just unethical, she said quietly. This is illegal, Imani finished. And it's not just Harvard, added another student. This model, this silencing, it exists at Stanford, at Columbia, at Yale. We've found patterns, identical tactics, slightly different words. Simone clutched the folder tighter. If we publish this, we won't just bring Harvard down. We'll expose the entire system. Imani nodded. But we'll need more than anger, more than proof. We'll need strategy, backup, media, legal protection, and a story, Simone added. You already are the story. Simone looked around the room. The forgotten, the erased, the brilliant. She wasn't just fighting for her future anymore. She was fighting for all of theirs. And for the ones who never got the chance to fight at all. They began uploading everything they had to a secure drive. Plans formed. Names shared. Tasks assigned. This wasn't just an underground room anymore. It was an operation. But then, mid-upload, Simone's phone buzzed again. A new message. From an unknown sender. They're already scrubbing the archive servers. You have 45 minutes before it's gone forever. Simone grabbed her bag, breath sharp. Because if she didn't reach the university's restricted data vault in time, the only full backup of the system that proved Harvard's decades-long pattern of discrimination would vanish, and with it, the truth. Simone didn't have time to think. The anonymous message had given her 45 minutes, maybe less, before Harvard's restricted data vault began a permanent scrub of decades worth of internal communications, flagged academic records, and predictive algorithm logs. These weren't just digital files. They were the spine of the machine that had silenced hundreds like her, and erasing them would mean erasing the evidence. She ran, through the tunnels under the science building, past security cameras and janitorial staff, past the comfort of logic and the illusion of safety. At 2:13 a.m., she slipped through the side door of the vault building, a fortified archive meant only for senior data officers and digital compliance staff. But she wasn't empty-handed. One of the students from the underground network had managed to forge a temporary credential ID, just enough to slip past the first layer. The vault wasn't elegant. It was cold, cement-walled, humming with the sound of processing servers and time-stamped backups. Simone's fingers shook as she keyed in the override code, praying the system hadn't caught up with her yet. The server blinked alive. For a moment, it looked like she'd made it in time. Then the screen flickered. A red warning popped up. Scheduled wipe in progress, estimated time remaining, 31 minutes. They were already in the process. She was racing against the deletion clock. Simone loaded her drive. It was encrypted. She started copying the directories flagged internal communications, risk matrix assessments, disciplinary override, and demographic deviation logs. Her heart pounded with every beat. The folder named Suppressed Student Reports alone took 5 minutes to load. Inside it were PDFs, names, psychological evaluations, grading bias reports, even faculty notes flagging students who had raised concerns about equity in class, each followed by coded recommendations. Delay graduation, restrict platform access, discredit subtly, encourage withdrawal. She copied all of it. When she finally pulled the drive, she had only 2 minutes left before the system began wiping. She turned to leave and froze. The motion sensor light near the back hallway had clicked on. Someone else was here. Simone held her breath, every muscle locking tight. Footsteps echoed down the hall, slow, measured, deliberate. Then, a voice. Simone. It was Langston. Her pulse spiked. I knew you'd come, he said. Curiosity always does. She turned, steadying herself. Why are you here? To make sure the system cleanses itself, he said calmly. And to offer you one last chance. Chance for what? Langston took a step closer, eyes scanning her. To walk away, quietly. We both know this. Performance ends badly for you. No Ivy League will touch you after this. No company. No lab. No future. Simone held the drive in her pocket like a lifeline. Langston's voice dropped lower. You're brilliant, Simone. I never said you weren't. But brilliance doesn't entitle you to burn the house down. She stared at him. What if the house is already on fire? His smile faded. Without a word, she turned and walked out. Slow, deliberate steps. She didn't look back. The next day, she sent the archive to 3 places: the Office of Institutional Equity, her New York Times contact, and a trusted open-source watchdog that specialized in exposing data-based civil rights violations. And she posted one video, a TikTok. Just under 2 minutes. It was shaky, filmed in a quiet room, her hoodie pulled low. She spoke calmly. My name is Simone Daniels. I'm a student at Harvard University. Over the past year, I uncovered how academic systems, built to look neutral, were systematically erasing Black students like me. I have evidence. I've been targeted, silenced, gaslit, and nearly expelled. I have documents proving how the administration manipulated grades, profiled students, and covered up discrimination for decades. She ended with, they tried to delete me, but I'm still here, and I'm not the only one. The video hit 1.2 million views by midnight. By the next morning, it crossed 10 million. Her name flooded timelines. Comment sections exploded. Some called her a hero. Others demanded Harvard respond. Journalists reached out. Civil rights organizations reposted the video with statements. One clip showed up on The View, another on Trevor Noah's podcast. Twitter's trending bar read, Simone Daniels and delete me not. Harvard scrambled. Their press office issued a longer statement. We are reviewing these deeply concerning allegations and will conduct a thorough investigation. It was too late.
The world had seen.
The hashtags evolved into movements. Students at other Ivy League campuses began posting anonymously, tagging Simone's story with their own. I was told my data model was too emotional. My professor said race had no place in statistics. They said I only got in because of diversity numbers. The stories multiplied. A national reckoning began. Simone stayed off campus. Her room had been compromised. The administration sent wellness check officers to her dorm, not to help her but to monitor her movements. She knew surveillance when she saw it. Lewis warned her, quietly, they're scared now. That makes them reckless. And he was right, because with the viral storm came something else. Threats. Her phone buzzed with unknown numbers. DMs from anonymous accounts said things like, know your place. You're ruining Harvard's legacy. You'll regret this. One email read, not all fires are digital. Simone told herself it was noise, that people lash out when they feel exposed. But then came the SUV. A black Suburban, parked half a block from where she was staying. No plates, no movement, just sitting there. She noticed it one night, while returning from a brief meeting with Imani and the others. The next night it was there again. Third night, closer. Lewis confirmed what she suspected. It wasn't university security. They used smaller campus units. This was private. Someone had hired a third party. She documented the plates, took pictures, sent them to the journalist, but the feeling wouldn't leave her, that she was being watched beyond a university's reach now. She was in the eye of a much larger storm. Simone retreated temporarily, laid low, but she didn't go silent. She recorded voice memos, filed affidavits, shared more documents with journalists under embargo. And then the call came. A reporter from the Washington Post told her that a congressional subcommittee on technology ethics had seen her video and wanted to speak with her. We're looking into bias in AI education pipelines, the voice on the other line said. We'd like your testimony. Simone sat there, stunned. Testimony?
Yes, they're moving fast. The footage you uncovered, the emails, the demographic weighting models, they want it on record.
Simone whispered. You mean like, under oath? Yes. The call ended. She stared at her phone. For months she'd fought to be seen. Now the highest institutions in the country wanted to hear her speak. But something deep in her chest tightened. This wasn't just about her anymore. If she testified, she wouldn't just be outing Harvard, she'd be exposing an entire ecosystem. Tech, policy, recruitment, everything. She'd be a target. But if she didn't speak now, they'd silence someone else next. And just as she started to pack for DC, another email dropped into her inbox. With a document so shocking, it made her hand tremble. A scanned contract between Harvard's data science department and a government defense agency. The title, Pilot Program Behavioral Prediction for Surveillance and Civil Control. Simone realized in that instant, her story wasn't just academic, it was national security. The document sat open on Simone's screen like a fresh wound. Pilot Program, Behavioral Prediction for Surveillance and Civil Control, signed by Harvard's Data Science Department, stamped with the emblem of a U.S. defense agency. It explained everything. The aggressive targeting, the desperate cover-ups, the refusal to acknowledge her work. This wasn't just about racism in academia. This was about a weapon, a predictive algorithm coded to flag threats based on behavior, but trained on data steeped in racial profiling and historical bias. They weren't just erasing black brilliance. They were coding blackness as risk. Simone printed the document in silence, her fingers shaking. Outside, the world was catching fire. Her story had sparked nationwide protest. University presidents were issuing statements. Students were walking out in solidarity. A coalition of alumni threatened to pull donations unless Harvard conducted an external investigation. But now, with this contract, it was no longer Harvard's storm to weather alone. It was national, and Congress had noticed. 3 days later, Simone stood in a hallway outside the House Committee on Ethics and Technology and Education. The U.S. Capitol loomed in every direction, marble and glass and cameras waiting. The air was humid, her palms were clammy. Behind the doors, a room full of lawmakers, analysts, tech executives, and civil rights leaders waited to hear her speak. She wasn't a student today. She was a witness, a whistleblower, a symbol. Simone clutched the manila folder of evidence, the emails, the screenshots, the algorithm logs, the signed contracts. But what weighed more was the pressure. Thousands of people outside these walls demanding justice, and millions watching from behind screens. She wasn't nervous. She was furious. Inside, the hearing had already begun. A panel of representatives sat at the long oak bench flanked by digital monitors. Cameras captured every angle. C-SPAN streamed it live. The chairwoman, Rep. Alicia Ramos of Georgia, leaned forward and tapped her microphone. We now call to the stand, Ms. Simone Daniels. Simone stood. The door clicked open. She walked into the chamber. Whispers swept the room. Cameras followed every movement. She took her seat, adjusted the mic, took a breath, and began. My name is Simone Daniels. I'm a senior at Harvard University, majoring in data science and applied systems. I came here because I believed institutions like Harvard were built to help all students achieve excellence. She paused, but I was wrong. The room went quiet. For the past year I was ignored, discredited, silenced, not because my research was flawed, but because it challenged a system built to protect its own. I uncovered an algorithm that penalized black users through hidden demographic weights. When I tried to correct it, my work was stolen. When I exposed the truth, I was punished. And when my story went public, Harvard didn't deny the algorithm. They tried to destroy me. She slid the signed government contract onto the table. This wasn't just academic bias. This was a federally funded program to develop predictive surveillance tools based on racist data inputs, and Harvard helped build it. Gasps echoed around the chamber. A representative leaned forward, stunned. You're saying this model was designed to influence civil control? It already has, Simone said quietly. It labeled students like me as threats, before we ever spoke. The questions came fast after that. One congressman asked about Langston, another about the administration's awareness. One tried to pivot to student integrity, but Rep. Ramos cut him off. We are not here to question Simone Daniels. We are here to question the systems that tried to silence her. Simone didn't flinch once, until they brought out the final witness. The chairwoman's voice echoed again. For our next testimony, we bring forward a faculty member from Harvard's Department of Computer Science, a contributor to the Behavioral Prediction Program, and until recently, an advisor to Ms. Daniels. Simone froze. The side door opened, and in walked Dr. Celia Monroe, her former mentor, the only professor who ever treated Simone with anything close to humanity, the one who quietly encouraged her to pursue fairness modeling, the one she trusted completely. Celia's expression was unreadable. As she walked to the table, Simone blinked hard. Why is she here? Celia adjusted the mic, cleared her throat, and began.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify some matters.
Her voice was flat, measured. Simone sat on the edge of her seat. Celia continued. I worked with Ms. Daniels for most of her academic career. She is brilliant. She's persistent. And her technical instincts are among the best I've seen. Simone felt a flicker of hope. But then, however, Celia said slowly, Ms. Daniels' conclusions about the behavioral prediction program lack full context. The demographic weighting, while problematic in implementation, was not designed with racial targeting in mind. It was a flaw, not a feature. Simone's stomach dropped. Celia kept going. There is no evidence that Harvard intended for its models to be used in surveillance initiatives. The partnership with federal agencies was academic in nature, not operational. And to my knowledge, Ms. Daniels' academic penalties were related to data misuse, not retaliation. The betrayal hit like ice. Simone's eyes blurred. Her lungs struggled.
No, not her.
She had handed Celia everything. The truth. The documents. The research. And Celia was spinning it, painting it gray, sanitizing it for the public. One of the committee members interrupted. Dr. Monroe, did you or did you not receive internal emails confirming intent to use these models for behavioral control? Celia hesitated. I received communications. Yes, she admitted. But I interpreted them differently than Ms. Daniels did. Simone couldn't stay silent. She leaned forward, voice cutting through the room like steel. Dr. Monroe, did you tell me to keep pushing, even when the department resisted? Celia didn't answer. Did you or did you not help me refine the fairness correction I wrote, the one Langston stole? Still silence. You were the one who told me to document everything, Simone said, voice rising. You said someday they'll try to pretend this never happened, and now you're the one pretending. Celia looked away. Simone's voice cracked, but didn't break. You weren't just my mentor, she said. You were supposed to be the proof that people like me could survive here. But you're just another voice keeping the system intact. The room was still. Then Repep Ramos leaned forward. Ms. Daniels, she said gently, do you have the original documentation of the partnership intent? Simone nodded. Yes. With annotations. And chain of custody logs. Submit them. All of them. Simone did. And in doing so, she took the story back. By the end of the hearing, the committee moved to open a full federal inquiry into the use of racial data in academic-government partnerships. The White House issued a press statement promising accountability in university surveillance research. But Simone didn't feel victorious. Not yet. Because betrayal from a stranger hurts. But betrayal from someone you trusted? That reshapes you. She stepped outside into the DC air. Reporters swarmed her. Students waved signs. One held a handwritten board that read, "They thought she was data. She became the algorithm." But Simone's hands were cold. Her mind was racing. Because Celia's testimony hadn't just hurt. It had revealed something deeper. In one line of her statement, Celia had accidentally mentioned a project code name Simone had never shared publicly. And that meant only one thing. Celia hadn't just betrayed Simone on the stand. She had been feeding Simone's research to the university board all along, and the paper trail to prove it was still buried inside Harvard's internal faculty database. Simone couldn't shake the sound of Celia's voice. It echoed in her chest, low and elegant, dressed in neutrality, the voice of a woman who had once pulled her aside after a harsh grading session and said, "They're not going to give you space, Simone. You'll have to carve it." Back then, Simone thought she meant it with empathy. Now she wondered if it had always been a warning, or worse, a setup. The congressional hearing had made headlines, but it had also made enemies. As the soundbites circulated across national news, Simone stayed in D.C., cloaked in tension. The government had opened an inquiry, Yes. Civil rights groups were rallying behind her, yes. But internally, Harvard wasn't broken. It was rebuilding. And Celia Monroe was helping lay the new bricks. Simone hadn't returned to Cambridge since the testimony. She couldn't. The school had frozen her credentials, flagged her record, and suspended her from all academic systems pending administrative review. Her dorm was locked. Her campus ID disabled. The place where she once buried herself in data had now officially erased her from its system. Not with violence, but with procedure. But what Celia had done felt personal. Worse than what Langston Caldwell or the provost had tried to do. Because Celia knew her code, her process, her theory. And still she sold her out. After the hearing, Simone revisited every exchange they'd shared, every lab meeting, every after-hours email, every compliment framed as constructive critique. What she once thought was mentorship now tasted like manipulation. She needed proof. That night, Amani, her contact from the underground student network, messaged her a single sentence. I found something inside the faculty mirror archive. Simone called immediately. Imani's voice was low. Careful. Harvard has an internal system for non-public comms between department advisors and board liaisons. It's meant to track academic risk, student discipline trends, internal strategy, that sort of thing. And Celia? Simone asked. Already knowing. She's been reporting on you since your first semester, Imani said. I'm sending you the file. The folder arrived within minutes. Simone opened it slowly. The first document dated back to her sophomore year. A private note from Celia to the board, discussing Simone's unusual obsession with fairness metrics and her increasingly adversarial posture during department discussions. The next document listed Simone's GPA, project logs, and a red highlighted sentence. Student is academically gifted, but temperamentally difficult, may pose reputational risk if not redirected. There were dozens more. Celia had tracked everything. When Simone questioned racial bias in class, when she challenged Langston's project assumptions, even when she mentioned Donovan in an offhand comment, Celia had noted it and flagged it. Simone stared at the screen, her entire body burning. Celia had been feeding her confidence while feeding her data to the board. The betrayal hollowed her. She had trusted no one in the institution, except her. And now, the only ally she ever believed in had been the administration's inside informant all along. She barely slept. But the next morning, a second message arrived. From Max. I need to see you. It's about Monroe. They met in a quiet cafe near Capitol Hill. Max looked exhausted, hollowed out by guilt. He sat down without meeting her eyes. I didn't know what she was doing, he said quickly. I swear. Simone didn't answer. She didn't trust him either. Not fully. Max slid a folder across the table. She called me right before the hearing. She sounded panicked. Told me to delete our old communications. Wipe anything that connected her to your work. Simone frowned. She told you to erase your involvement. More than that, Max said. She asked me to scrub one specific thread between you and her. One where she edited your model. She was afraid someone would find out she co-authored parts of it. Simone stiffened. She what? Max nodded. She didn't just mentor you. She collaborated. Her notes, her edits, her version control logins. She contributed. And if that came out, the board would know she didn't just observe you. She built with you. That makes her complicit in the bias correction. And if those corrections are linked to the federal contract, then she wasn't protecting Harvard, Simone whispered. She was protecting herself. Max handed her a flash drive. This is everything she deleted from the shared lab server. She didn't know I kept a local backup. Simone plugged it in that night. The files revealed everything. Tracked changes in her code from Celia's user profile. Comments on parameter ranges, alternative structures, feedback on error rates. Celia had directly shaped Simone's final model, and the fairness correction it introduced, which meant she had known the full truth long before the whiteboard incident. She knew it was real. She knew it was revolutionary. And she knew it was dangerous. But instead of standing beside Simone at the hearing, she chose to protect herself. Still, one file stood out. A voice memo. Titled only with a date. 2 weeks before the hearing. Simone pressed play. It was Celia, her voice shaky, conflicted.
I don't know if she's gonna make it. They've already flagged her record.
Caldwell said she'll be out by spring. I told them I was coaching her on career options. But she's too smart for that. She's going to figure out what I did. A pause. I didn't mean to let it go this far. I didn't mean for her to become the enemy. Another pause.
Then softer.
She reminds me of who I used to be. Simone let the audio play twice, then 3 times. By the 4th, her tears had dried. She finally understood. Celia hadn't betrayed her because she didn't believe in her. She had betrayed her because she did. Because Simone had done what Celia couldn't. She didn't bend. She didn't adapt to survive. She fought to be seen. And in doing so, she made Celia's survival strategy, silence, feel like surrender. Celia didn't sell her out to destroy her. She sold her out to save herself from the mirror. Simone held up. But her final confession, her voice on tape, her words preserved, flipped everything. Because now Simone had more than evidence of institutional corruption. She had proof of internal conspiracy. She had proof that even the people protecting the system had once tried to dismantle it and failed. And Simone? She didn't fail. She was still standing. And just as she prepared to submit the new evidence to federal investigators, her phone rang again, this time with a call she never expected to answer. The ID read, Donovan Westbrook, incoming video call. And she knew the story wasn't over yet. The video call notification blinked silently on Simone's laptop screen. Incoming call, Donovan Westbrook. The name alone stopped her heart. For a moment, she thought it was a prank, a glitch. Maybe someone using his name. Donovan had vanished years ago, scrubbed from Harvard systems, removed from publications, buried so deep in silence that even whispers about him were rare and brief. She clicked answer. The screen flickered, then steadied, and there he was, older than the photos she had seen, leaner, a bit gaunt around the cheeks, a beard now, dark-rimmed glasses. He looked like someone who had seen too much and said too little. His voice was soft but certain. You found it, didn't you? Simone could barely respond. He nodded once, eyes scanning her face as if confirming she was real. And they came after you. They still are. He sighed. I always thought someone would make it out with the truth. I just didn't think they'd survive the first phase. Simone swallowed hard. Why did you disappear? I didn't, Donovan said quietly. They made sure I couldn't come back. But I stayed close. There are ways to watch the system, even from the outside. He explained that after being discredited, he had taken a teaching role, under a pseudonym, at a small liberal arts college, keeping his head down, watching Ivy networks from afar. He followed Simone's case from the moment her whiteboard solution went viral. I saw what they did to you, he said, and what you did in return. You didn't just challenge the system, you rewrote its rules. Simone was quiet. Then Donovan added, but there's one more piece they never let you near. Something they've been guarding even tighter than the algorithm you exposed. Simone leaned forward. What? He turned his camera and revealed a second laptop screen behind him. On it, a simulation interface glowed, rows of dynamic code, looping in real time. The Polaris model, he said. An adaptive machine learning framework meant to predict long-term social risk behavior using aggregated behavioral and biometric data. Built by Harvard's elite research lab, and completely dysfunctional. Simone's brows furrowed. I've never seen this. You wouldn't have, Donovan replied. Only 6 people were given access. Langston was one, Caldwell, Celia, 2 contractors, and me, back before they buried me. He clicked through tabs, revealing system logs and timestamps. They've been trying to solve the integration flaw for 3 years, he continued. The system can't account for anomalous inputs, like culturally non-conforming behavior, regional speech patterns, or community-specific values. It misfires on anything that doesn't align with traditional white upper-class behavioral norms. Meaning it codes blackness, queerness, non-Western customs, anything outside their model, as instability. Simone stared, her mind racing. And they still tried to deploy this. They've spent millions trying to make it work, Donovan said. But the core logic is broken. They can't fix it, because they never admitted the bias is the design. Send me the model, Simone said. You have 6 days, Donovan warned. After that, the contractors take control of the data and destroy the current archive. That's the window. Solve it, and you don't just beat Harvard. You prove to the world that the system they built isn't just flawed, it's rigged. Simone nodded. Then let's do it. For 6 days, she lived off coffee and half-slept hours. She shut the world out. No interviews, no calls, no emails. She returned to what first brought her into data science, the language of pattern, the logic of behavior, the beauty in the quiet math behind chaos. She dissected Polaris line by line. Its neural networks were trained on skewed historical data, criminal justice patterns, standardized test scores, social media sentiment analysis, all without context or correction. It used proximity scores weighted against predictive anomalies, a euphemism for racialized behavior it didn't understand. Simone didn't just repair the flaws, she rebuilt the spine. She introduced cultural variance nodes, recalibrated the training data with demographic balancing tensors, and stripped out legacy markers designed to flag non-conforming behavior. She fed the model her own datasets, ones informed by the diverse realities the original creators erased. On the sixth day, the simulation ran without failure for the first time in its existence. And it didn't just work, it predicted outcomes with a 14% higher accuracy rate across all groups, while completely neutralizing demographic penalization. Simone stared at the screen, shaking. She'd done it. She had solved the one problem Harvard's brightest minds couldn't, because their brilliance was built on blindness. The following morning, she submitted the full fixed model to the congressional inquiry. She didn't sign her name. She signed it. For those they erased. The tech world erupted. Specialists and ethicists flooded forums with praise and astonishment. Whoever rewrote Polaris didn't just fix a bug. They rewired the future of predictive modeling. Think tanks launched immediate analyses. International universities requested the new architecture for academic study. But what stunned everyone wasn't just the model's success. It was what Simone included with it. A technical appendix, exposing how the original version used racially skewed markers to assign threat probabilities, even in non-criminal behavioral simulations. It was proof, quantifiable, statistical, irrefutable proof, that Harvard had built its AI on data that criminalized culture, and masked it under the banner of research. Simone had turned their code into a confession. Suddenly, tech firms distanced themselves from Harvard's partnerships. Donors froze their endowments. Public officials demanded audits of academic labs, tied to predictive behavior modeling. The house was burning, and Simone Daniels had lit the match with precision. But even amid the praise, she stayed grounded, because she knew victory in public didn't mean safety in private. The emails came back, this time from other universities. We'd like to invite you to speak on racial equity in data systems. Would you consider a fellowship with our AI ethics initiative? We're reviewing ways to incorporate your simulation corrections into our curriculum. Simone responded to none. She had one last thing to do. A message from Donovan came late that night. They know you fixed it. You understand what this means, right? Simone replied. Yes, it means they'll try to rewrite the history again. And she wasn't going to let them. She compiled every file, every model, every confession, every voice note, and uploaded it to an open-source archive titled The Daniels Ledger, accessible to anyone, free, undeniable. But just as she published the final update, a new folder appeared in her inbox. No sender, no message, just a file name. Original Polaris Sourcer 1. Simone opened it. Inside wasn't just code. It was a design log, dated 6 years earlier. The first note was short. Initial demographic weight, suggested by Dr. Felix Langston. Codename Optic Gray. And beneath that, something even worse. A funding note. Project sponsored in coordination with Homeland Behavioral Insight Division. Use domestic threat profiling. Simone's hands trembled. This wasn't just about Harvard. It wasn't just about AI. It was about government systems using elite institutions to quietly build surveillance tools that criminalized identity before action, and branding it progress. And just as she reached to export the log to the congressional archive, her system froze, all screens went black, and a single message appeared in white text.
This archive has been seized under federal jurisdiction. Do not attempt to recover. The screen went black.
Simone stared at the stark white text glowing from the darkness of her laptop. This archive has been seized under federal jurisdiction. Do not attempt to recover. Her pulse slowed, then spiked. She blinked, clicked the mouse. Nothing. Pressed escape. Command. Power. The machine was dead, not crashed, not frozen, but silenced. Someone had reached inside her device and shut it down. Not just the file, the entire system. She sat motionless. The glow from the screen still burned behind her eyes. She had just exposed the most protected piece of the Polaris program, its original purpose, its sponsor, its intent in the moment she tried to preserve it. The government made its move. Not Harvard. Not Langston. Something higher. She backed away slowly, as if moving too fast might shatter something. That night she made no statements. She posted no updates. The world didn't know yet that her machine had been breached. But Harvard did. Because the next morning, a formal letter arrived at her temporary DC address, hand-delivered in an envelope too expensive to mean anything good. Office of the President, Harvard University. She opened it slowly. It was a formal offer. Position: Senior Research Fellow for Ethical AI and Demographic Equity Modeling. Compensation: undisclosed. Tenure track: custom lab. Full academic support. No mention of the lawsuit. No mention of the erased grades, the surveillance, the threats, or the betrayal. Just 4 polished paragraphs, welcoming her back into the academic fold, and offering a permanent space at the table she helped build. Simone folded the letter with shaking hands. It was never about apology. It was about control. They wanted her brilliance, not her story. Her code, not her conscience. After everything they did, the fake violations, the data wipes, the death of her academic record, they were offering her a seat at their table like nothing had happened. And they hadn't even said her name. But the public did. Say her name. Harvard trended by nightfall. So Simone responded. Not on a call. Not in private. She published her answer as an open letter in the New York Times. You do not get to offer me a seat at a table you once tried to flip over my head. She didn't write with rage. She wrote with precision. She detailed everything from the ignored questions to the stolen code, from the surveillance SUV to the algorithmic weapon no one wanted to claim. She wrote about the night her computer was seized without warning, and how she realized something terrifying. Even when you prove the system is rigged, the people in power don't dismantle it. They invite you to join it so you stop talking. I never asked for your position, she wrote. I asked for your integrity. The letter shattered the conversation. Professors from across the country signed open letters supporting her stance. Student unions launched boycotts. Ivy League institutions that had previously stood silent began issuing belated acknowledgments of internal bias. But Harvard? It went quiet again. Because for the first time, silence was its only defense. 3 days later, an unexpected email arrived. Not from administration, from a retired black professor who had left Harvard decades ago after publishing a Little Red Journal article on predictive bias and institutional erasure. He simply wrote, "They finally had to say your name. That means you won." But Simone didn't feel like she'd won. She felt like she was standing at the edge of something even more dangerous. Civility. They couldn't erase her anymore. So they tried to absorb her. But she didn't want their table. She wanted a new blueprint. Still, there was one more meeting she agreed to take. It was held in a conference room inside Harvard's newly formed Center for Ethical Innovation. A public relations rebranding, built on the rubble of the department Simone had burned down. Langston wasn't there. Caldwell wasn't there. Only administrators and 3 board members, all in polished suits and practiced smiles. Simone, one of them said, rising. Thank you for coming. She nodded, saying nothing. They handed her another folder. She didn't open it. We wanted to speak candidly, one continued. What happened before, the misunderstandings, the conflicts, we acknowledge your experiences, but we also see the opportunity to move forward. Simone raised an eyebrow. Forward? As part of our commitment to transparency, we're extending you the opportunity to co-chair a new initiative, designing guidelines for equitable AI development. With your insight, we believe. She held up her hand. They stopped. She looked at each of them slowly. Do you understand what I had to become just to be heard? No one answered. I bled on your code. I lost friends. I lost mentors. You nearly took my degree. And now, because the headlines embarrassed you, you want to hand me a branded podium and call it redemption. Again, silence. Simone continued. If you want change, you don't need my name on a program. You need to admit your crimes. We're not here to talk about. Yes, you are, she interrupted. You're here because the country watched you destroy me, and I refused to die. One of the board members, an older white man with a soft voice, leaned in. Miss Daniels, what is it you want? She smiled. Not warm, not cold, just certain. I want to build the table somewhere else, and I want to make sure no student like me ever has to ask for a seat at yours again. And with that she stood. They called after her, voices tight, polite desperation rising, but she didn't stop. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing a black woman can do isn't shout. its lead, and take the blueprint with her. That evening, Simone received a private message from a globally recognized think tank, not just inviting her to speak, but to lead a new AI division built entirely from scratch. And attached to the offer was a familiar file she hadn't seen in weeks, the original Polaris source code, restored, with one line added, recovered via internal whistleblower. Source, faculty, anonymous. The restored Polaris file sat on Simone's desk like a heartbeat, steady, undeniable, alive again, despite every attempt to kill it. It was the last thing she expected to see, a gift from an anonymous whistleblower inside Harvard's own faculty, a final crack in the walls of an institution that had spent years pretending it was made of marble, instead of glass. For the first time in months, Simone breathed without bracing for impact. But the war was not one with lawsuits, or hearings, or hashtags. It was one with what came after when the noise faded, when the crowds moved to the next crisis, when the institutions quietly rebuilt themselves in the shadows. It was one when someone like Simone turned survival into structure. The think tank that reached out, the Global Institute for Ethical Intelligence, wasn't just offering her a role. They were offering her a blank canvas, a space untouched by Harvard politics, free of academic sabotage, free of the coded expectations placed on black scholars in elite rooms. They wanted her to lead an initiative on community-centered AI, an idea she had once scribbled in a notebook long before anyone took her seriously. Now, it was going to be a department, her department, and she accepted. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, out of purpose, because she understood something that Harvard never did. Intelligence meant nothing without agency, and brilliance meant nothing without the power to protect those coming after you. Within months, Simone relocated to DC, where she stepped into her new role. Her office was simple, light-filled, clean, with a glass wall overlooking the city. No gold plaques, no patronizing trailblazer portraits, just the space she needed to build. The first thing she did was hire a team. Not the usual suspects.
Not Ivy League clones.
Not protégés of professors who built careers off the backs of erased students. She recruited from community colleges, historically black universities, rural tech programs, grassroots coding organizations, and overlooked research fellows from across the country. She built a team reflective of the voices Harvard had tried to bury, the ones who coded in bedrooms, who stayed quiet in class because they were tired of being talked over, who showed up every day knowing brilliance alone wasn't enough to survive elite spaces. Simone wasn't assembling an academic staff. She was building a movement, and the country noticed. Universities that once ignored systemic bias now requested her guidance. Companies asked her to audit their AI ethics protocols. Civil rights groups consulted her on predictive policing patterns. Her inbox flooded with letters from black students across the nation, some in tears, some angry, all hungry to be seen. She didn't respond with speeches. She responded with structure. She launched the Daniels Fellowship, a year-long mentorship and research program for underrepresented students in data science. She built virtual classrooms where she taught fairness modeling the way she wished someone had taught her, slowly, gently, recognizing the emotional violence that came with being told your perspective was subjective in systems built to erase you. Every week, hundreds of students tuned in to her live sessions. They didn't see her as a symbol. They saw her as a map, proof that you could survive erasure and still build something the world couldn't ignore. One night, during a fellowship Q&A, a student from Detroit raised her hand. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "How did you do it?" she asked. "How did you keep going when the people meant to guide you were the ones hurting you?" The room went still. Simone paused, thinking of Celia, of Langston, of the black SUV, of the silent hallways where no one said her name. "I didn't keep going," Simone said softly. "Not at first. I broke. I questioned everything. I wanted to disappear. But the moment I realized I wasn't the only one, that the system wasn't attacking me because I was wrong, but because I was right, that's when I stood back up." "And now," the student whispered. "Now," Simone said, "I don't walk into rooms to prove myself. I walk in to make the room safer for the next person." The student nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Moments like that became common. Reminders that Simone wasn't just correcting algorithms anymore. She was correcting generations of academic harm. She was rewriting the emotional script that had kept so many brilliant black minds small and silent. And still she didn't forget where she came from. She kept in touch with Amani and the underground network, who used their collective story to build a national database of institutional bias incidents. Donovan became a consultant for the think tank, mentoring younger researchers who reminded him of Simone, the ones who saw patterns others pretended didn't exist. As for Harvard, it entered its reform phase. They created committees, panels, public forums. They invited speakers. They rewrote policies. They removed Langston quietly, under the guise of retirement. Caldwell relocated to a private sector role, overseas. The provost resigned. But Simone never returned. Not even when they finally publicly said her name. It happened during a nationally broadcast panel on academic equity. The president of Harvard sat at the microphone and said, with a practiced seriousness, "We failed Simone Daniels." It was meant to be an admission. But to Simone it was a timestamp, a reminder that acknowledgement was not accountability. And she didn't need their validation anymore, because her work was bigger than them. Months passed. Her fellowship expanded. Her research center doubled in size. She was invited to speak at conferences, universities, global summits. She turned down most of them. Not because she was afraid, but because she understood something powerful. The movement wasn't about putting her on stage. It was about putting others beside her. Her final act that year was launching the Daniels Index, a nationwide fairness evaluation that tested academic institutions on transparency, demographic equity, algorithmic neutrality, and retention of marginalized researchers. It was brutal. It was honest. And it was adopted as a national benchmarking standard within weeks. In 1 year, Simone went from invisible to inevitable. Her story was being taught in classrooms, referenced in policy debates, discussed in activist circles and boardrooms alike. But legacy isn't about noise. It's about what remains after the noise stops. On a quiet morning with sunlight filtering through her office window, Simone finally exhaled the breath she'd been holding since her first day at Harvard. She had survived the storm, rewritten the landscape, and built something untouched by elitism or violence. Trauma had become blueprint. Pain had become infrastructure. Silence had become movement. She believed, truly believed, that she was finally free, until the next envelope arrived. Thick, heavy, embossed paper, no return address. But she recognized the emblem instantly, the Yale crest. She opened it carefully, half expecting another tone-deaf invitation, another opportunity dressed like reconciliation. But it wasn't that. Inside was a single page, a formal letter, not offering a position, not asking for her endorsement, not inviting her to speak. Instead, "We request your expertise. We have uncovered a pattern in our predictive modeling lab, resembling the system you exposed at Harvard. We believe students are at risk. We need your help. Yale University, Office of the Provost." Simone stared at the page, her chest tightening. It wasn't over. Not even close. Because Harvard wasn't the disease. It was just the first symptom. Simone folded the letter slowly, realizing the truth she had feared all along. The same algorithmic rot she exposed wasn't isolated. It was spreading across the Ivy League, and Yale had just admitted they were next. No one should have to prove their worth just to be heard. Simone's story isn't rare. It's just one that finally got recorded. If you've ever been silenced, erased, or made invisible, you already know the truth. Type yes if you believe silence should never win.